They announced it at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning, 3 minutes after the cheeriest weather bite and the studio's pre-recorded laugh track. The chyron slid across screens with the mechanical calm of headline machines everywhere. Mark's shocking exit. Kelly Ripa reacts. For a split second the world kept moving in its usual grooves. Breakfast poured. Subway doors closed. Someone forgot to set the coffee maker, and then everything bent around the line like iron filings around a magnet. Phones lit up. The office Slack channels burped with forwarded links. Tweet storms lit into existence like a meteor shower. People who had never watched the show daily suddenly knew something intimate had ruptured in a place that sold intimacy for a living. Kelly watched it in the green room, under the damp glow of a television that had become an echo chamber for her life. She'd been told this was coming, vaguely, in the kind of corporate whisper that feels like a draft from a cracked window. But receiving the official cut of the tape, seeing the blue letters on the hospital of headlines, felt like being struck by a small, precise object. She'd rehearsed what to say and not say in meetings and memos. She'd had the PR team email her a script that used legally safe words and the warmth of canned empathy. None of that prepared her for the particular pang of being the person whose name trailed the phrase like a halo and a weight at once. "Go on, eh?" said the producer with the gentlest possible voice. The studio hummed, lights calibrated, the teleprompter scrolling like a hungry river. Kelly sat at her desk, fingers folded around a mug she'd already sipped twice. Her face, which the camera loved because it could hold change, softened into the carefully attentive expression she'd cultivated during years of making the private feel commonplace. And then she spoke, measured, honest, a blend of public obligation and private fracture. She told the viewers what she could tell them, which was both a great deal and nothing at all, that Mark had left, that it was sudden, that the show was working to understand and to give him space. She read the words and then, when the cameras were still live, she did something no memo could require. She let her voice crack. That tiny, human fissure went global in the time it took to blink. Comment sections evaporated into arguments, hashtags divided into camps. Some defended the privacy of those involved while others poured through the past for cracks in the household porcelain that could explain everything. Every network on the dial spun the story like a kaleidoscope until the original image had been translated into 20 different interpretations. The spectacle was familiar. Spectacle and morning television were old allies. But for Kelly, the spectacle was not the story. The story was the absence left by someone who, for years, had sat beside her on stage and shared a life in a format that depended on a believable intimacy. The mark at the center of the headline had become a public shorthand for an entire constellation, a laugh in a commercial, a sketched apology on a Christmas visit to a charity telethon, the warm way he had once ruffled hair on live television to prove nothing staged could be entirely false. He'd been part of a duo people invited into kitchens and into commutes. Together they'd traded jokes and jibes and crafted a story of partnership that ran parallel to the private narrative of a marriage. When that kind of rhythm stops, the silence is loud enough to have its own sound design. Inside the small office upstairs, instead of the sound of people gossiping, there was a tense, professional hush. The team who had built their lives around the rhythms of live and now found themselves wrestling with the ethics of immediacy. A legal counsel read the line again, "We must be careful." The words felt like nails, but the producers knew they had to move. Ratings would spike, reporters would call, the network would ask for a calm statement and a plan. Nothing prepared them for the private calculus that sat behind every public utterance, when to speak, what to withhold, how to be honest without becoming a feed for the hunger of the press. Kelly left the studio under the pressure of 100 eyes pretending they were polite. In the corridor she paused, letting the hum of electricity strip off the last layer of the on-air performance. She dialed a number she already knew would make her voice steadier by virtue of its familiarity. "Are you okay?" she asked. She had rehearsed the call in her head and then discarded the script for the actual question because it was true, raw. The person on the other end made a small, private noise. It could have been an exhale or laugh meant to hide trembling. "I'm here," the voice said. "I'm with the kids. We okay?" That second answer unspooled Kelly's professional poise into something more complicated. There were the children, the ones who had been used to cameras and yet were, by human law, forbidden territory. There was grief too, private and jagged, and 1,000 practicalities that never make for nice television, school pickups, parenting schedules, the small economy of a household that had been used to being photographed. And there was a question that would burrow into everything from now on: who speaks first to define the narrative? Backstage, the producers decided on a tribute segment, careful, affectionate, framed with soft lighting and lyrics that leaned toward nostalgia. They planned a montage, outtakes, behind-the-scenes laughter, never meant to be sad clips of a pair who had, for so long, sold the idea that television could be a little like family. But as they gathered footage, the montage felt suddenly false. Smiles that had always been a combination of performance and truth acquired a new sheen, and the montage threatened to become either an elegy or an act of public manipulation. They shelved it, choosing instead to let Kelly have the first public words. Her message that morning was not simply a public service announcement. It was a small and deliberate portrait of complexity. She spoke about the shock of the moment, the bewilderment that came with change, and the need for time. She asked for boundaries and asked the public to remember that while television was their business, people's private lives were not public property. For a moment the studio rested in the rare pool of humility you only get on television when everyone understands they are sharing someone else's pain. The words were simple: "Please let us have privacy," and under them lay the rigor of a person who understood that privacy had become a kind of sanctuary that had to be fought for in plain sight. The next days were a study in the choreography of crisis. Newspapers printed elaborate timelines. Morning talk shows debated what the exit meant for branding and content. Someone from a rival station did a deep dive into paper scene accounts of what went wrong, while podcast hosts dotted the story with speculation and empathy in equal measure. Social media became a field of competing narratives, a bandwagon of support, a squad of criticism, a legion of mimetic jokes. There was even a documentary filmmaker who reached out through an agent, asking if the story could be told in the long-form way documentary cameras eat human vulnerability. "Not now," Kelly said by the third call. "Not now." The answer was practical and final. Timing, she decided, would be her ally. Privately, the house changed how it breathed. The rooms had been used to hosting lights and wires, but now the walls took on the ineffable quality of a place where a life had been unspooled. Friends visited with casseroles and phrases that were both therapeutic and performative. "If you need anything," they said, as if the need could be boxed and delivered. There were practical things to handle, legal notices and managerial memos and uncertainty about pending contracts, and smaller things that dislocated the ordinary. The toothbrush left in the guest bathroom, the morning mug still in the cabinet where it always sat, the child's drawing taped to the fridge like an artifact of normality. Kelly's nights were the coolest. Cameras could be turned off, producers could file statements, but grief practiced its own chronology. She would wake in the darkness and walk through the house in socks, her feet finding the places that had known laughter. Sometimes she sat on the couch and listened to the recorded shows they had done years earlier, episodes that showed them laughing in the face of minor chaos, and she felt a peculiar sense of rearrangement, as if a beloved book had been lifted from the shelf and a blank space remained where the spine once sat. She called friends and exhaled into the receiver. She called her children into the room, and they came, sleepy and sharp and painfully normal. Publicly, she adhered to a rhythm that felt rehearsed but was, in truth, deeply considered. She refused interviews that would make the story into scandal. She declined to appear on panels where pundits would trade in motives. Instead, she chose small acts of clarity, a written statement asking for privacy, a quiet Instagram post that had nothing to do with declarations and everything to do with presence, a picture of a simple breakfast table with the caption, "We're together." The press amplified the gesture into meaning anyway. Headlines quoted sentences and assigned themes. Privacy in the age of spectacle is always a negotiation. The House had a quiet cohort of practical allies. Lawyers vetted every request that came in, a publicist filtered inquiries and scheduled a single sit-down with a trusted magazine that had promised a sensitive piece. But even those professional buffers could not protect against continuing rumors. There were speculation columns that traced conspiracies through old interviews and social media comments, trying to stitch together an explanation that often resembled pattern-seeking more than truth. Gossip is an engine that eats context and spits out narrative. In that factory, facts was sometimes the least interesting ingredient. Kelly found an unexpected solace in small routines. She began, stubbornly, to host the family's Sunday pancake breakfast she'd once used as occasional content, now purely for the kids. She learned how to fold the laundry in the old way Mark liked, a little ritual she'd once performed sloppily but with theatrical flair on camera. The servility of these gestures was not about performance. It was about anchoring. She taught their youngest how to set the table the way her grandmother had taught her, napkins folded with a small flourish, forks placed with calm precision. Those afternoons were not for cameras, they were for a household that needed to learn to be a home again. Outside, the media grind intensified. Conspiracy hosts found new fodder. Somewhere between the ethical pieces and the tabloid covers, opinion columns argued whether the institution of a public relationship could survive the driver's seat of modern celebrity. Was it possible that people had love and image and not the real private being? Was the institution of celebrity marriage